So in a way, if we say we all have in a medicine residency, we all have come across this cross reference from not very much like department. OG, they call us for every urgent consultation possible with high sugars. But in a way, you should realize that's the consultation which is most important, because you are actually taking care of two lives there by treating the consultation from obstetrics. So in a way, they should be given highest priority. And second, with all due respect, medicine part is something which is not very strong there. So definitely they require our help to manage things. And gestational diabetes is something which has outcome for mother, or at least and even on fetus. So if we do not manage well, we are actually inviting all the troubles from the starting of life. So I'm not very sure whatever I have managed till now is correct or not. So this is one very sensitive topic, and if we know it by endocrinologist, that will be the best thing for us in practice. So this topic, in a way, it's very high yield for MCQ, and more importantly, I will tell, forget the MCQ part. It is very important for practice. We should not do anything wrong when we are dealing with gestational diabetes, or at least we should take opinion from experts when we do not know how to manage. So briefly introducing Dr. Kunal, he is actually my undergraduate batchmate. We were together in MBBS, and he's one guy who is brilliant at whatever entrance he is going to give, he is going to get his rank for sure. So throughout the things, he has cleared his DM endocrinology from KEM Mumbai. So actually, out of our 50 students yesterday, what I told, around 15 are interested in endocrinology. That's the highest number of specialty of choice. And if you are actually planning for endocrinology, KEM is one of the best institute in India to do DM. So Kunal obviously had the first or second rank to get in. So he's one of the best person to guide us. And at present, he's working as a consultant in Gujarat only as an endocrinologist. So I will just hand over to Kunal, and Kunal, you can start sharing your screen. So we will have your presentation, and you can start your class.
Okay, so Dr. Sanket, I think the screen is visible to you, right?
Yes, yes, completely,
Yeah.
completely.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sanket, for the warm introduction, and hello and good evening to everyone over here. I am meeting you all for the first time. Actually, I have been told by Dr. Sanket multiple times that the audience which we are having is highly learned in the subject of medicine, definitely more than what we were in our residency or in our at the end of MD medicine. So it's my
You are
privilege
still
to be
very
here
humble,
with
I think, Kunal. You are very humble to tell this. We know how you are. Okay, so I think you have to
Well, that's
continue with
true.
your topic.
Every generation is definitely more intelligent than its past generation. That is for sure.
Okay.
That is said. And as Dr. Sanket said, we are going to discuss diabetes in pregnancy. Again, we all know that diabetes in pregnancy or a gestational diabetes is not a case discussion in our MD final examination from a Viva point of view. But again, practically, it is very much important when we come in our practice. Also, when we are appearing for a DM entrance examination, even in the medicine part, as well as for the subject wise, that is endocrinology part, there are for sure one or two MCQs are there on gestational diabetes mellitus. So for from this point of view, also it is important to discuss here. So why I've kept the topic title as diabetes in pregnancy and not the gestational diabetes. So there is a reason behind it. We all know, and further we'll discuss in next few slides. So first of all, here is a classification of diabetes mellitus proposed by American Diabetes Association right from 2014, and it's being carried forward till today. So broadly, there are four types of diabetes, and microscopically, we can say there are other specific types of diabetes in category 3. But we are going to discuss this category 4 or gestational diabetes here. So first of all, I would like to begin with one or two short cases. So first case is a 27-year-old lady, gravida 1, and presents when she is having 6 weeks of pregnancy. And actually, she is a known case of type 1 diabetes mellitus since the age of 9 years. So we can say that since last 18 years, she is a known case of type 1 diabetes mellitus on insulin therapy. And currently, at 6 weeks of pregnancy, her HbA1c level is 7%. So this is one case. Second case is a 35-year-old lady, Gravida 2 with Para1, and now she has presented at 9 weeks of pregnancy or 9 weeks of gestational age. And if we see her past history, her previous pregnancy also she did have history of gestational diabetes mellitus, preeclampsia and preterm LSCS labor. And now at 9 weeks of pregnancy, her HbA1c level is 8.6%. So now what is the diagnosis for both of these cases? Is it gestational diabetes or not? So just let me tell you, the diagnosis here is not a gestational diabetes, it is a pre-gestational diabetes, or also called as an overt diabetes, also known as a pre-existing diabetes before pregnancy. So this is the diagnosis, and this is the difference between the gestational diabetes and pre-gestational diabetes. So here in second case, it is slightly tricky. Second case presented to us at 9 weeks of pregnancy, and her HbA1c was above target or above in the range of diagnosis of diabetes, that is 8.6%. Although she had stopped all the medications or all pharmacotherapy after her first delivery, and she did not test for diabetes also after her first delivery, but then here we can find out her HbA1c is elevated, and that is definitely existing before pregnancy also. So that is why in both these cases, diagnosis is pre-gestational diabetes type 1 and type 2, right? And what are the cutoffs or the criteria for diagnosis of pre-gestational diabetes? So it is the same as a non-pregnant individual. So fasting more than 126 milligram per deciliter, HbA1c more than or equal to 6.5%, either random plasma glucose more than 200 with symptoms of hyperglycemia, or 2 hour 75 gram glucose load test 2 hours is if it is more than 200 milligram per deciliter. So now one important point I would like to make here, in your Viva, if you are speaking specifically, some of the examiners don't like if you say blood sugar. So fasting blood sugar or postprandial blood sugar, it is not a blood sugar, it is a plasma glucose, not a sugar, it's a glucose. So always be specific, it is a plasma glucose, fasting plasma glucose, postprandial plasma glucose. And the second important point is in the diagnosis of diabetes, there is nowhere mention of postprandial glucose measurement. So postprandial glucose is not included in the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, type 1 diabetes, or gestational pre-gestational diabetes, because of obvious reason, that is the diet is not uniform from one to other individual. So that is why it's always a post glucose load 2 hour glucose that is used for diagnosis of diabetes. So as I said, the criteria for diagnosis of pre-gestational diabetes are the same as for the any non-pregnant individual to diagnose type 2 diabetes mellitus. So after the diagnosis, pre-gestational diabetes, in both these cases, what are the risks involved in these particular cases when they are having this particular level of HbA1c and with further pregnancy? So risks are actually continuum. Slight risk involved with gestational diabetes, but the risk becomes higher with the pre-gestational diabetes as compared to gestational diabetes, and even higher with the pre-gestational diabetes, which is of longer duration, and if it is associated with vasculopathy, or also known as the vascular complications of diabetes. So the risk further increases. So just to briefly tell you about this classification proposed by, yeah.
Kunal, just one minute. I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but one of the major thing I and not you, we missed is a break we did not take after our cardiology class. So I think our all student will be expecting it. So I think from student also I expect you can be very bold and tell me that you didn't give break. It is not as such mentally possible to get all the information so fast. So I think extremely sorry, Kunal, for interrupting like this.
Yeah, of course, that's
But
understandable.
I think yeah, they deserve the break. So let's break for 7 to 10 minutes, and I will talk to you over phone, and we'll continue.
Sure.
I think so. Is it fine if someone can confirm? We will start in 5 to 10 minutes. I'm sorry from my side that I didn't give break. It was an exhaustive cardiology class, so I completely understand. And let's meet after 5-7 minutes.
Just a brief repeat of 2 to 3 slides, I would like to say. Classification we know. The two cases we discussed, one is a type 1 diabetes comes to us at 6 weeks of pregnancy, and another is a lady at 35 years in her second pregnancy, in her first trimester, being diagnosed with an HbA1c of 8.6%. But her first pregnancy also, she had a history of gestational diabetes, and she had a preterm labor and cesarean section delivery. But post her first delivery, she had stopped all medications and she did not test for any other glycemic testing and all. So here we discussed that diagnosis here is not a gestational diabetes, it is a pre-gestational diabetes or an overt diabetes, and the criteria or the cutoff for diagnosis are the same as for any non-pregnant individual. So what are the risks involved, which we were going to discuss? Again, just to tell you, the risk involved with the diabetes in pregnancy, either gestational diabetes or pre-gestational diabetes, go on increasing more with the pre-gestational diabetes, and more so even when the diabetes has been of long duration and is associated with a vasculopathy or a vascular diabetes complications. So just to tell you in brief, this is the first classification of a diabetes in pregnancy proposed by Priscilla White, or called famously known as a White's classification. But be here that this classification came back in 1949. So at that time, type 2 diabetes or gestational diabetes was not known. Only insulin dependent or insulin deficient diabetes was known, and those patients who became pregnant later on. And that is why this classification caters to only pregnant type 1 diabetes population. There is no need to go into the detail of this particular classification, not at all important in today's world, not for any individual. But just in a very recent publication in 2015, according to this particular classification, what are the risks involved in the pre-gestational diabetes population? So conventional diabetic mothers, we expect that the fetus would be macrosomic or a large for gestational age, and shoulder dystocia. So these are the conventional or well-known diabetes related complications or perinatal complications. But with the pre-gestational diabetes, as the duration of diabetes increases, more so with the increase in the hypertension and vasculopathy, there is no need to look into the numbers or complicated tables here. Just look at the left side of the column. So here is the enumeration of the risk involved in a pre-gestational diabetes. But just to tell you that as the duration of diabetes increases, as there is presence of hypertension as another complication, and more so with the presence of vasculopathic or the diabetes related vascular complications, there is increase in the prevalence of these shaded complications. So which means increase in the prevalence of stillbirth, small for gestational age, preterm delivery, preeclampsia, and cesarean section deliveries. While as these duration and other complications increases, the risk of large for gestational age, macrosomia, and shoulder dystocia reduces. So this is very important. Why these diabetes related specific complications reduce with the increased duration of diabetes? Because as the diabetes increases, duration increases, as the hypertension is there and vasculopathy is there, there is increase in the uterine artery and the placental artery occlusion and the atherothrombosis, which is increased. And we all know that the hypertension, even in the PIH, that there is more chances of IUGR or a small for gestational age and not large for gestational age. So that is why these are the complications. Small for gestational age, preeclampsia, and preterm delivery, they are more with the increased duration of diabetes, and large for gestational age reduces. So just to mention or enumerate the specific risks of diabetes in pregnancy, just remember the names of these complications for Viva purposes as well as for MCQ purpose: spontaneous abortions, fetal congenital anomalies, preeclampsia, intrauterine fetal demise, macrosomia, neonatal hypoglycemia, hyperbilirubinemia in a neonatal respiratory distress syndrome, and finally, increased future risk of diabetes, hypertension, and obesity in both mother as well as in offspring. So these are the specific risks involved with the diabetes in pregnancy, both maternal as well as neonatal and fetal outcomes or fetal risks. Now, what are the congenital fetal abnormalities or anomalies associated with the maternal diabetes, also known as a diabetic embryopathy? So anencephaly, microcephaly, congenital heart disease, which includes many of the congenital heart diseases, to be specific transposition of great vessels, and ventricular septal defects, among others. renal anomalies, and caudal regression, that is sacrococcygeal anomalies or a sacral agenesis. So these are the more specific congenital abnormalities associated with the increased percentage of the increased number of hyperglycemias in pregnancy. And again, just to tell you that all these congenital anomalies, they are directly proportional to elevation in HbA1c during the first 10 weeks of pregnancy, that is during the period of organogenesis in a pregnancy. Correct? So many a times we have seen that MCQs are being asked most common congenital anomaly associated with maternal diabetes. So most of the times it becomes a caudal regression syndrome or a sacral agenesis. If it is not there in option, you can go ahead with the ventricular septal defect or a transposition of great arteries as a cardiovascular anomalies are the second most common anomalies associated with the diabetic embryopathy. So here is the list of these anomalies. Now, where is there an increase in the risk of anomalies associated with diabetes? So here it has been studied in the like one more point I wanted to make out here is that it is the pre-gestational diabetes or a pre-existing diabetes only where there is an increase in the risk of congenital fetal anomalies. Gestational diabetes, to be specific, is not associated with increase in the congenital anomalies risk, because conventionally gestational diabetes is defined as diabetes diagnosed after 20 weeks of pregnancy. So this one point. Now in pre-gestational diabetes, what is the percentage of HbA1c where the risk of congenital anomalies increases? So here are the two studies. Just to briefly tell you that if we see these dotted lines, they indicate the 95% confidence interval. And after the lower limit of this confidence interval goes up as the HbA1c goes above 6%. So continuously after HbA1c is more than 6%, there is continuously increased risk of congenital anomalies. And same is the risk for the fetal and infantile death as the periconceptional HbA1c increases. So the point to remember here is that what is the recommended target of HbA1c before pregnancy or in the first trimester of pregnancy. So including American Diabetes Association guideline ADA 2021 and most other international guidelines, ACOG and UK NICE guidelines, they recommend that ideally pre-conception HbA1c should be less than or equal to 6.5%. Some others mention 6 to 6.5%. So that you need to remember less than or equal to 6.5% is the ideal HbA1c before conception. While in some patients, especially we say type 1 diabetic patients, where this particular strict target of 6 to 6.5% is not being possible without much hypoglycemia or without risk of severe hypoglycemias, then this target can be relaxed to less than 7% if hypoglycemia is a concern. So here is the number which you need to remember. Ideal pre-conception HbA1c is less than 6.5%. Now coming back to two of our cases, type 1 and type 2 pre-existing or pre-gestational diabetes, having known the risks involved and the target of HbA1c before pregnancy, how do we counsel them when they have presented in the first trimester with this particular level of HbA1c? So we need to counsel that there is a high risk pregnancy because of the hyperglycemia, because of the first case. If we see here that 24-hour urinary proteins are 300 milligrams per day, so we can say it border of micro and micro to macroalbuminuria. So vascular complication already set in here. In the another pregnancy, previous pregnancy also had a history of preeclampsia and preterm labor. So that definitely both these pregnancies are high risk pregnancies. There is an increased risk of malformation associated with the congenital fetal anomalies are there. And that is why there is a need for intensified treatment in both of these conditions, considering the level of HbA1c that we are having. One of the important VIVA point here, retinopathy assessment. Retinopathy assessment is definitely very important in pre-gestational diabetes only. Again, to be specific, gestational diabetes mellitus is not associated with an increase with development of diabetic retinopathy or any of the diabetes related microvascular complications. So it is only pre-gestational diabetes. So retinopathy assessment is indicated before pregnancy or in the first trimester whenever patient comes in a first visit. If there is no baseline retinopathy, then according to standard guidelines, we can monitor retinopathy every yearly. But if there is baseline retinopathy on the first trimester screen, then examination of the fundus is required in every trimester, that is every 3 months up to 1 year postpartum, and depending on the severity. So this is the important recommendation from most of the guidelines, that retinopathy assessment is required before pregnancy or in first trimester, and then if there is baseline retinopathy every trimester. So now we saw the pre-gestational diabetes and the risks involved in the pre-gestational diabetes. Now what is gestational diabetes or actual gestational diabetes? So although if you are asked that definition of gestational diabetes, it is defined as carbohydrate intolerance of any degree of severity with onset or first recognition during pregnancy. So by that, our second case becomes gestational diabetes by definition. But actually, gestational diabetes is the like pathophysiological gestational diabetes is diagnosed only after 20 weeks of pregnancy. Before 20 weeks of pregnancy, if there is any diagnosis of diabetes, it is usually unless proven otherwise, it is undiagnosed pre-gestational diabetes. So here we can see unrecognized type 2 diabetes. They are actually diagnosed in pregnancy as an overt diabetes, but they are labeled as a GDM because they are diagnosed for the first time in pregnancy. So that becomes the 35 to 40% of population of pregnancy in diabetes. And while 5 to 10% of the patients with diabetes in pregnancy are having positive autoantibodies for the GAD or any other pancreatic antigens, and they become unrecognized type 1 diabetes, and they are first time diagnosed in the pregnancy. So like GDM encounters 60% are true GDM or actual GDM, while the 40 to 50% of these pregnancy in diabetes is actually unrecognized type 2 or type 1 diabetes, which has become obvious in pregnancy. If we see the percentages or the prevalence of gestational diabetes from 0.6% to 21%, in our country it is from 3.8 to 21% is the prevalence. So just to remember a rough estimate, on an average, one study has mentioned that on an average it is a 7% prevalence of gestational diabetes in our country, but various studies they reported from 3.8 to 21%. So what is the pathophysiology of gestational diabetes? So that we will discuss in briefly in 2 to 3 slides only. So now we are discussing about actual GDM, which is going to be diagnosed after 20 to 22 weeks of 20 weeks of pregnancy. So what happens as the pregnancy advances from the first trimester through third trimester, there is increase in the size of placenta and there is increase in the maternal adipose tissue. Now these placenta, as the size of placenta increases, these are the hormones which are responsible for the increase in the insulin resistance and that are secreted by the placenta. So just remember the names of these hormones. They are frequently asked in MCQs also: progesterone, cortisol, HPL, that is human placental lactogen, prolactin, and the human chorionic somatotropin, or also known as the placental growth hormone. So these are the placental hormones which are continuously secreted in an increasing amount as the pregnancy advances, and that are responsible for increase in the insulin resistance throughout pregnancy. So what happens is that as the pregnancy advances, as I said, after 20 weeks, there is increase in the insulin resistance, or here is the insulin requirement throughout pregnancy. So at the end of 36 weeks of pregnancy, the insulin requirement is nearly 2.5 times of the non-pregnant state, and it is the relative insulin deficiency. So what happens in previous slide, as the pregnancy related insulin resistance increases, there is compensatory hypertrophy of the pancreatic islet beta cells. So compensatory increased secretion of insulin from the pancreatic beta cells, and ultimate goal or the aim is to maintain the normal glucose levels. But what happens is that when there is increased insulin requirements because of increased insulin resistance, there is a beta cell compromise or relative beta cell insulin deficiency that is not able to compensate for the increased demands, and that results in development of gestational diabetes. So if you are asked in an MCQ, what is the predominant mechanism of development of gestational diabetes? So it is the relative insulin deficiency or a relative insulin deficiency or failure to compensate for the increased insulin demands. Insulin resistance is going to be there for every pregnancy. Insulin requirements are going to be high for every pregnancy, but your pancreatic beta cells should be able to compensate for this high demand. If they are not compensating, that results in development of gestational diabetes. That is the point. Another, as I said, that there is increase in the maternal obesity or the adipose tissue. Just remember, these are the two adipocytokines that are important in metabolic health. One is leptin and one is adiponectin, which we all know. Just to tell you, leptin level usually increases in pregnancy. Adiponectin level usually decreases in pregnancy. Leptin is a pro-inflammatory cytokine. Adiponectin is an anti-inflammatory cytokine. So this leptin also forms some part in the pathophysiology of gestational diabetes, and leptin is associated with increased insulin resistance. And adiponectin, which level of which usually declines during pregnancy, more so in gestational diabetes, and reduced levels of adiponectin are associated with the increase in the insulin resistance. So adiponectin is an insulin sensitizing hormone. Leptin is an insulin resistance hormone. Leptin increases in pregnancy, adiponectin decreases in pregnancy. Adiponectin is a good cytokine, we can say. So this is about the adipocytokines in pregnancy. Now, after looking at the pathophysiology of gestational diabetes, the question is whom to screen for gestational diabetes. Does all patients need screening for gestational diabetes? Actually, like by criteria, if we go, there is no need to screen all pregnancies for gestational diabetes. But if we see in our practical life, practical life, generally, most of the patients become eligible for screening for gestational diabetes. So just to briefly look at the table, what like patients are divided into low risk, average risk, and high risk based on the their ethnic and other characteristics. Low risk includes that low risk patients that screening for gestational diabetes is not required, and low risk is called when all of these are met, all of these. So it should be a member of an ethnic group with a low prevalence of gestational diabetes, no known diabetes in a first degree relatives, age is less than 25 years, weight normal before pregnancy, weight normal at birth also if it is known, no history of abnormal glucose metabolism, and no history of poor obstetric outcome. If all of these are met, then there is no need to screen for gestational diabetes. But we all know that practically it is not possible. One or the other risk factors are always there, and that is why most of the pregnancies become eligible for screening for gestational diabetes, especially because most of our Indian ethnicities are having moderate to high prevalence of gestational diabetes. So that is there. If there is an average risk, which means that if out of these 7, if there is less than or equal to 3 criteria are present, then it becomes an average risk. And then performing oral glucose tolerance test at 24 to 28 weeks is required, and accordingly diagnosis of gestational diabetes is made. That we'll see in next few slides. If it is a high risk pregnancy, which is more than or equal to 4 of these criteria are present for gestational diabetes, then anytime, whenever patient presents to you, not necessarily between 24 to 28 weeks, even the patient presents to you at 15 weeks or 20 weeks, you do oral glucose tolerance test. If it is normal, then you repeat it at 24 to 28 weeks, and still it is normal, then you label that is not GDM. So this is the screening criteria for gestational diabetes. Now, after looking at whom to screen, here are what are the cutoffs for diagnosis of gestational diabetes. So this is a very complicated criteria for evaluation for the diagnosis of gestational diabetes. We are not going to go into the details of this, but I would just like to mention small history that the diagnosis of GDM was defined earlier by Sullivan in 1964, and a particular oral glucose tolerance test was conducted. But just to tell you that here, what was the outcome which was used to label these are the GDMs and these are not GDMs. So it was the future prevalence of diabetes mellitus in the mothers after delivery, after up to 10 years post delivery. So these were the cutoffs, and then multiple other criteria have evolved. This particular NDDG criteria, that is National Diabetes Development Group in United States, they just converted these values while Sullivan measured the values from the whole blood. This particular group converted the values calculated only to convert into the plasma values. Then another glucose measurement method came, which we all know that glucose is measured with the GOD, POD, glucose oxidase, peroxidase method. ADA came up, WHO. Here, this is important to remember for an MCQ point of view. A DIPSI, that is a Diabetes in Pregnancy Study Group in India. So that conducted its own study, and that came up with a target or a cutoff for diagnosis of gestational diabetes is 75 gram oral glucose tolerance test, and a 2-gram glucose, a 2-hour glucose. If it is more than 140 milligram per deciliter, then label it as a gestational diabetes mellitus, just like a WHO. So till now, US was preferring 2-step procedure. No need to go into detail. And India, we were following the DIPSI criteria. So just remember, DIPSI criteria were the Indian criteria based on the Indian patient population. 75 gram glucose, oral glucose tolerance test, one single value at 2 hours. If it is more than 140, label as GDM. So these were the criteria. But what was the problem with all these multiple criteria is that only future maternal diabetes was the outcome which was being monitored. No pregnancy or neonatal outcomes were there to define gestational diabetes. So what we are targeting or what we are treating in gestational diabetes was only future maternal prevalence of diabetes. So that is why pregnancy and neonatal outcomes was important to study to target gestational diabetes population. So, and because of these varying cutoffs, there was no uniformity in cutoff, and that is why this came a landmark study in the field of gestational diabetes. If you need to remember only one study or one trial in the field of gestational diabetes, multiple times asked in MCQs, it is the HEPO study, that is hyperglycemia and adverse pregnancy outcomes. So this is the only landmark study in the field of gestational diabetes for the diagnosis or for derivation of the cutoff of the diagnosis of gestational diabetes. So multi-center study, they conducted a 75-gram oral glucose tolerance test between 24 to 32 weeks of pregnancy. So this is again important period to remember. It was conducted between 24 to 32 weeks of pregnancy, and overt diabetes was excluded from this study. Overt, which means if fasting glucose more than 105 and if 2-hour glucose value if more than 200, so they were excluded. And just remember 4 of the parameters or the 4 of the outcomes which were measured for this particular HEPO study. Again, this is important from MCQ point of view. What were the 4 parameters studied in the HEPO study, or hyperglycemia and adverse pregnancy outcomes? So first is the birth weight more than 90th percentile, also called as the large for gestational age, primary cesarean section deliveries, clinical neonatal hypoglycemias, and cord blood serum C-peptide levels if it is more than 90th percentile of that particular gestational age. So these were the 4 parameters studied in the HEPO study. And if we see, there was a continuum in this study: 0 hour, 1 hour, and 2 hour. 3 glucose values were measured on the oral glucose tolerance test. And as the sugar values or the glucose values increased, prevalence of all these complications was in a continuum. There was no particular value that below this there is no risk of any of these complications. So it was in continuum. So according to HEPO criteria, so after HEPO, another important MCQ becomes here. From the data of the HEPO trial, this particular international group was formed, that is also known as the IAD-PSG, International Association of Diabetes and Pregnancy Study Group. So now what criteria we are following all over the world are the IAD-PSG criteria for diagnosis of GDM. Okay, so it was said that any of the value. So earlier criteria used that more than or equal to 2 of the values, 0 hour, 1 hour, and 2 hour, more than or equal to 2 values are abnormal, then label GDM. But here in this particular HEPO and IAD-PSG, they found that if any value was increased, there was increase in the prevalence of these complications. So that is why what did they recommend is that only one step oral glucose tolerance test for all pregnant patients between 24 to 28 weeks of pregnancy with a 75-gram oral glucose, 2-hour oral glucose tolerance test, and the cutoff is only one value. If it is abnormal, then label GDM. So this that is why here is the cutoffs which we follow nowadays. And again, an MCQ point: fasting glucose if it is more than or equal to 92 milligram per deciliter, 1-hour glucose value if it is more than 180 milligram per deciliter, and the 2-hour glucose value if it is more than 153 milligram per deciliter. If any of these values is above this target, then label gestational diabetes mellitus. And this particular criteria or this particular guideline is based on the pregnancy outcomes and not the future development of diabetes in a mother outcome. So that is why this particular IAD-PSG criteria have been endorsed by all the guidelines worldwide. Even in India, now we are following IAD-PSG cutoffs for diagnosis of gestational diabetes. So just you need to remember these figures: 92, 180, and 153. Any one value abnormal, diagnosis of gestational diabetes mellitus. Okay. So diagnosis of gestational diabetes is clear now. Now, what is the treatment of gestational diabetes mellitus? So before going on to treatment, whether treatment of gestational diabetes, treating for high glucose, does it help or not? So for that, ECOIS was the first trial which showed that with the treatment, whatever intervention like dietary intervention or pharmacotherapy, but it definitely reduces the incidence of macrosomia, large for gestational age, shoulder dystocia, and preeclampsia. Similarly, birth weight, shoulder dystocia, and preeclampsia were reduced in another of the trials. So definitely, this was just to tell you that treatment of the gestational diabetes helps in reducing the diabetes or the GDM related complications, fetal as well as maternal. Now, what are the guiding parameters to treat any of the gestational diabetes patient? What are the targets? So earlier, which we said that 92, 180, and 153 were the diagnostic criteria for the diagnosis of GDM. But when we are treating GDM, what should be the target? So this is again an MCQ point. Glycemic targets for the patient of gestational diabetes, it should be a fasting less than 95, 1 hour value less than 140 and 2 hour value less than 120. So just you need to remember or mug it up. Those were the diagnosis of diabetes criteria, and these are the monitoring tools. So monitoring, and these are the SMBG values, self-monitoring of blood glucose or glucometer values, not the laboratory plasma glucose values. Okay, so fasting should be less than 95, 1 hour should be less than 140, and 2 hours should be less than 120 for any gestational diabetes patient whom we are intervening. So these are the glycemic tools. What is the ideal gestational weight gain? Now this gestational weight gain particularly depends on the pre-pregnancy or the pre-conception BMI and our weight category, whether we are overweight, obese, normal weight or underweight. And this is the particular recommendation by the Institute of Medicine. Underweight BMI 12.5 to 18 kilograms of a complete pregnancy weight gain is allowed. Normal weight 11.5 to 16 kilograms, overweight 7 to 11.5 kilograms, and obese individuals only 5 to 9 kilograms of weight gain throughout pregnancy or throughout 40 weeks of pregnancy is adequate. Now fetal growth parameters. So this is very important. We know, or as we discussed, that gestational diabetes is associated with large for gestational age. Just to tell you, large for gestational weight, gestational age, LGA is defined as birth weight more than 90th percentile of that particular gestational age. And macrosomia is defined as a birth weight of more than 4 kilograms. Now, why there is macrosomia or why there is LGA with maternal diabetes? So because of maternal hyperglycemia, common concept is that fetal like maternal insulin is crossing the placenta, but actually it is not the insulin which crosses the placenta. It is the maternal hyperglycemia. Glucose is the molecule which crosses the placenta and goes to the fetal circulation, and it results in the higher insulin secretion from the fetal pancreas. And because we know that the fetal or any insulin is an anabolic hormone or a somatotropic hormone, and the fetal growth is predominantly determined by fetal insulin, and that is why high insulin in the fetal circulation is associated with the high somatic growth. And what we measure as a marker of somatic growth in the fetus is the fetal abdominal circumference. So if you are asked that out of following parameters, which of the fetal parameter is measured as a fetal somatic growth in gestational diabetes, it is fetal abdominal circumference, not the fetal femoral length, not the biparietal diameter, not the head circumference. So here is the fetal abdominal circumference, which we monitor as a marker of gestational diabetes treatment monitoring parameter, and cutoff is 75th percentile. So if the fetal abdominal circumference is more than 75th percentile, it is labeled as a high risk. And if it is less than 75th percentile, it is labeled as low risk. So these are the fetal growth parameters which we monitor, right? Now, what are the management tools? So first and foremost, cornerstone or the fundamental of the diabetes management, even GDM management, is the medical nutrition therapy or the lifestyle modification therapy with the nutrition and exercise. So what is the nutrition therapy and exercise recommendations for pregnancy? So just to tell you that medical nutrition therapy, again, this figure is very important. It has been asked in some of the MCQs. 70 to 85% of the GDMs are well managed with the medical nutrition therapy only. 15 to 30% GDMs only require pharmacotherapy. So most of the GDMs are well managed with the medical nutrition therapy and exercise. So on an average, roughly 1800 to 2500 kilocalories of diet is required per day. Healthy carbohydrate controlled diet with 40 to 50% of the carbohydrate, like 40 to 50% of the dietary calories should be composed by complex high fiber carbohydrates, 15 to 20% by proteins, and 30 to 35% by fats. Non-caloric sweeteners may be used in moderation even in pregnancy, and postprandial low intensity prolonged exercise, they do help in keeping your postprandial glucose values in target. Now, just one fact which I would like to mention here, no necessity to remember exactly, just for our practical purposes. If we want to calculate the required caloric intake in a GDM patient, it depends again similar to BMI category. If it is underweight, 36 to 40 kilocalorie per kilogram per day is the recommended caloric intake, and that goes on decreasing trend as the BMI increases. And what are the non-caloric sweeteners which may be used, which can be used in pregnancy? So again, just for MCQ, I have mentioned here, US FDA approved non-caloric sweeteners are the aspartame, sucralose, acesulfame, and ribodioside A. only saccharin, you remember, only saccharin that crosses the placenta, and that is why saccharin is not recommended in pregnancy, while all four are safe to use in pregnancy, and they are US FDA approved as a non-caloric sweeteners. So this becomes the nutritional therapy and exercise therapy for management of gestational diabetes. Now, how do we monitor? So earlier as I said, that target for the monitoring of the gestational diabetes are the self-monitoring of blood glucose values, and the targets were 95 fasting, 140 at 1 hour postprandial, and 120 at 2 hours postprandial. So here is this SMBG is the main tool if you are asked in an MCQ for monitoring of diabetes mellitus or gestational diabetes, and it is the postprandial blood glucose values that are more important than the preprandial or the fasting blood glucose values, because all the hormonal levels which we discussed, the progesterone, cortisol, HPL, placental GH, which increase predominantly postprandial glucose and not the fasting glucose. And the physiology is that because of these hormones, postprandial glucose increases, and the more of the energy transfer from mother to fetus occurs during the postprandial period only. So this is the physiology, and that is why the postprandial glucose is the main factor which determines the fetal growth or fetal overgrowth or fetal abdominal circumference more than 75th percentile. So that is why it is the postprandial SMBG values which are more important to monitor than the preprandial glucose values. And if you are asked that management tool or the monitoring tool of choice for managing GDM is the SMBG, self-monitoring of blood glucose, not the continuous glucose monitoring device, not the HbA1c. So just to mention CGM, as I said, CGM, continuous glucose monitoring, introduced in last 1 or 2 decades. It has become an important tool in GDM patients, but it is not, it is an adjunctive tool. It should not be the standalone tool to monitor in gestational diabetes without SMBGs. So again, as I said, SMBG is the tool of choice to monitor gestational diabetes. If we look into CGM, only one point to remember here is the name of the trial, which is sometimes asked. It is the CONCEPT trial, that is continuous glucose monitoring in pregnant women with type 1 diabetes trial. So only type 1 diabetes pregnant women randomized trial has been there, and the name of the trial is CONCEPT, sometimes asked in MCQs. So this trial showed that if the CGM devices are used in pregnancy, it results in mild lowering of HbA1c without significant hypoglycemias and without compromising other parameters. So I think many of you might have come across with the continuous glucose monitoring, and I have just provided 2 graphs here, which we get at the end of the 1 or 2 weeks of CGM devices treatment. So here the shaded line here is the target glucose range, which you can alter depending on your patient profile. So here I have put 80 to 180. Okay. So in gestational diabetes, we know that the cutoff is up to 140. So we can lower down the upper limit of time in range to 140 also. And from this graph, you can get this particular data from the machine only: average blood glucose, time in range, time below target, and time above target. And based on this, there are recommendations for the pregnancy continuous glucose monitoring also. So this is the first day of device placement, from, like, if we say here 1 o'clock device was put, and time in range is only time in target is only 2% on the day 1, and then you start acting with the insulin and medical nutrition therapy. On day 2, we can see here time in target or time in range is 57%, time below range, that is hypoglycemia, 0%, and time above range, that is hyperglycemia, is 43%. And now, just to remember or the figures, international consensus guidelines for the time in range for pregnant type 1 diabetes patients. So target time in range goal is more than 70%. So here what we saw, which was 57%, it should be more than 70% for any pregnant type 1 diabetes patient. Time below range should be below 4%, and time above range should be below 25%. So just a number to remember, time in range should be more than 70%. I think this is the most important. It should be more than 70%. Now, after looking into the monitoring tools of diabetes, pharmacotherapy of of gestational diabetes. So in pharmacotherapy, only 2 oral agents are approved for use in pregnancy, that is metformin and glyburide, also known as the glibenclamide. So only one sulfonylurea which is approved to use in pregnancy is glibenclamide or glyburide, and another is the metformin, and third agent is insulin. So all these 3 are category B to be used in pregnancy. Metformin and glyburide, that is glibenclamide, both cross placenta, while insulin does not cross placenta. Here, if I tell you specifically, metformin crosses the placenta more than the glibenclamide. So if we measure the cord blood metformin levels, they are twice as the maternal blood levels, while the glibenclamide levels are 70% of that of the maternal blood levels. But according to most of the guidelines, insulin is the first line of treatment. So if you are asked in any MCQ, first line of treatment or a pharmacotherapy of gestational diabetes is insulin, because it does not cross the placenta. If you are supposed to use oral agent, then metformin is more preferable than glibenclamide or a glyburide. Now, in this particular study, there was this is a very important study, MIG study, also a very famous study in the gestational diabetes topic, metformin versus insulin for treatment of GDM, known as a MIG study. And the ultimate target or the ultimate outcome was that there was no difference in these particular outcomes, composite outcomes of large for gestational age, small for gestational age, cesarean deliveries, hypertensive disorders, or neonatal hypoglycemia. Metformin and insulin both performed similar. And based on this particular study, MIG study, many of the guidelines, they, although if you are asked and if there is a clear line that insulin is the first line of treatment for diabetes in pregnancy. Okay, but then guidelines, they go on to mention that if the patients are overweight or obese, and if there is mild gestational diabetes requiring pharmacotherapy, metformin can also be a choice of treatment in these patients. So for MCQ purpose, insulin is the treatment of choice, but practically we know that metformin can be used as a first line treatment in pregnant patients who are especially overweight or obese, and especially if they are having mild gestational diabetes mellitus. So this is the point here. Glibenclamide is very less preferred in management of gestational diabetes nowadays because of the risk of hypoglycemia associated with glibenclamide, and that is why insulin is easy to titrate and easy to monitor in pregnant patients if they are requiring after metformin therapy. Now, after metformin, what are the insulin preparations which are approved for use in pregnancy? So if we see short-acting insulin, regular human insulin, or the soluble human insulin, which is there, which is approved, rapid-acting insulin analogs, all three are approved, which are available in market. That is insulin aspart, Lispro, and glulicin. And intermediate-acting insulin, that is insulin NPH, neutral protamine hegdom, and insulin detemir. So these are the insulins which are US FDA approved for use in pregnancy. Now this is very important from MCQ point of view and from Viva point of view also. Multiple times asked. These are the insulins which are approved in pregnancy. If you are asked first choice of basal insulin, it is always insulin NPH, neutral protamine hegdom. Some other guidelines also recommend detemir can be used as a first choice of basal insulin because multiple RCTs are available. Insulin glargine, which is commonly used as a basal insulin worldwide, but because there is no randomized control study with insulin glargine in pregnancy, it is not US FDA approved. But many of the guidelines mention that if the patient is already on insulin glargine and having good metabolic control, you can continue insulin glargine in these patients, because observational studies have found that insulin glargine is safe in multiple observational studies, but it is not FDA approved. And the newer basal insulins, that is glargine 300 and insulin degludec, they are not studied in pregnancy and they are not approved and not to be used in pregnancy. So these are the insulins which are approved and which can be used in pregnancy. If you are asked basal insulin of choice in pregnancy, it is NPH or detemir, not the glargine. While short-acting and rapid-acting analogs all are approved. Okay. So after looking into the pharmacotherapy, just going back to our fetal growth parameters, as I said that fetal abdominal circumference defines the low risk versus high risk gestational diabetes populations. If it is the fetal abdominal circumference is more than 75th percentile, then we need to lower the glycemic target or the glycemic monitoring target. So earlier, just to repeat, earlier target or conventional target was fasting 95, 1 hour 140 and 2 hour 120. But here, if the abdominal circumference is more than 75th percentile, then we need to reduce the fasting target to 80 and 2 hour value from 120 to 110 for better outcomes. If the fetal abdominal circumference is less than 75th percentile, we can relax our glycemic targets. So just here, same abdominal circumference more than 75th percentile. Conventional was this target, fasting 95, and 2 hours 120. But we need to do it more strictly, or more strict glycemic control is required. So one fasting target becomes 80, and the postprandial target 2 hours becomes 110, and with that we can achieve half. We can reduce the risk of LGA babies from 29 to 13%. So that is why, just one more figure to add, modified glycemic target for GDM patients with an abdominal circumference more than 75th percentile is 80 in fasting and 110 at 2 hours. So this was the management of diabetes, just to look into the case for more practical purposes. That is a day-to-day practice. We are seeing the cases of gestational diabetes as a medicine resident or as a consultant. 34-year-old lady, gravida 2, presents at 25 weeks of gestation and referred for abnormal OGTT. So here at OGTT performed at 25 weeks was fasting value 87, 1 hour value 173, and 2 hour value was 161. So here any of, if as I said, any of the three values, if they are abnormal, then it is labeled as GDM. And here the 2 hour value is 161, which is more than 153. The cutoff is 153. So this particular case is labeled as gestational diabetes mellitus. If we see the background, father had the type 2 diabetes, so positive family history, and her previous pregnancy also she had a history of gestational diabetes mellitus. So that is why she was started on lifestyle modification or dietary therapy. As I said, is the cornerstone of management of GDM, along with exercise. Now she was put on self-monitoring of blood glucose at home. So these are the SMBGs. These are from the actual patient only. So these are the postprandial glucose values after breakfast, after lunch, and after dinner. So after the dietary therapy, these are the values. So here we can see that after breakfast and after lunch values usually are within target. These are the 2 hour values, so they are below 120, while the after dinner values are above target. So that is why she was started on the short acting or rapid acting insulin injection aspart 0, 0, and 6 units. So 6 units before dinner aspart was added. And when USG was done at 32 weeks of gestational age, her abdominal circumference was between 50th to 75th percentile. So it is below 75th percentile. So we can say that this patient becomes a low risk in gestational diabetes. And Doppler study was normal. Again, as the pregnancy advanced, multiple of the morning and afternoon, or the post breakfast and the post lunch values also went up above target, that is above 120, and that is why the insulin dose as well as the insulin frequency was gradually increased as the pregnancy advanced. And as you can see that as I earlier also said in the pathophysiology section, that the insulin requirement continuously goes on increasing till 36 weeks of pregnancy, when there is a peak in the insulin demand. And that is why this patient was ultimately on the insulin aspart of 14, 15, and 12 units daily. Because her fasting glucose was always normal, that is why she did not require any long acting or basal insulin. And that is the case with majority of the gestational diabetes cases, or true gestational diabetes cases, that basal insulin is many times not required. It is only the postprandial glucose which is deranged and which is to be monitored. And the short acting insulin or the rapid acting insulin analogs are the insulins of choice. Total weight gain had been 9 kilos. USG at 38 weeks, now showing abdominal circumference of 75th percentile. So now what should be done in the management or in the obstetric management? So just to brief you, at 38 weeks, abdominal circumference is 75th percentile. How to manage further? So this is an ACOG recommendation or an ACOG clinical guidelines from 2018, when the labor should be induced in a patient with gestational diabetes. So if the patients who are on gestational diabetes and who are on only controlled on the lifestyle modification therapy, there is no need to monitoring in terms of non-stress test or the fetal cardiotocography, and the timing of delivery is natural whenever it happens, up to 40 weeks or even after 40 weeks. If the patient is on pharmacotherapy, either insulin or metformin, then non-stress testing is indicated between 32 to 36 weeks of pregnancy, and the timing of delivery should be between 39 to 40 weeks. And if this is an overt diabetes or a pre-gestational diabetes, then in all cases, antepartum fetal testing with the non-stress test is indicated at 32 weeks only, and the timing of delivery should be between 37 to 38. There is no need to wait beyond 38 weeks in overt diabetes, because these are the patients which are more likely to develop placental vasculopathy and fetal demise even at term of the pregnancy. So these are the just timing of delivery guidelines you need to remember. GDM patients on LSM, no need to induce labor. GDM patients on pharmacotherapy between 39 to 40 weeks is the timing of delivery if it is if it does not develop before that, and in overt diabetes between 37 to 38 weeks. In our previous patient, even though her abdominal circumference was more than 75th percentile, but because non-stress test which was done at 35 or 36 weeks, which was reactive, so we will wait till 39 to 34 weeks of pregnancy and then we will induce labor. So mode of delivery, GDM is not an indication for cesarean section, just to remember, but the complications of GDM may be an indication for cesarean section. So as such, if there are no complications of GDM, if it is a well-managed GDM, there is no need of cesarean section. But the complications like if it is macrosomia or the LGA babies, there is a higher chance of CPD or the cephalopelvic disproportion. If there is a need to induce labor while the cervix is unripe, then there is a need for a cesarean section, and that is if there is a fetal compromise. So these are the complications of GDM where it becomes necessary for a cesarean section. And just to remember a figure, what is the estimated fetal weight which should promote the cesarean section delivery without the trial of a labor? So although it has been mentioned that 4.5 kilograms, if it is more than that, then directly go for LSCS and not for normal delivery. But practically, especially in our country, it is not possible. In our country, if it is even if it is between 3.5 to 4 kilos, many a times we prefer cesarean section deliveries. Below 3.5 in our country, we can say that we can definitely give a trial of normal delivery. And the postpartum follow-up of diabetes or GDM patients, breastfeeding decreases the risk for future diabetes. Weight control is the key to prevent future development of diabetes in mother, because just to tell you that between 2 to 10% of the gestational diabetes patients, they go on to develop type 2 diabetes in the next 10 years. Metformin is safe during lactation, and after pregnancy it is recommended by ADA that between 6 to 12 weeks there should be a fasting glucose and HbA1c checkups to determine who are the cases which are going to develop overt diabetes. So just to summarize, pregnancy in diabetes, if it is early pregnancy diabetes is diagnosed, then it is labeled as pre-gestational diabetes, and the criteria or the cutoff for diagnosis of pre-gestational diabetes are the same as for non-pregnant, 126, A1C 6.5%, and post-glucose more than 200. And here are the vasculopathy, hypertension, and the diabetes duration, which is more important and which is the which harbingers the complications associated with pre-gestational diabetes. That is the small for gestational age, preterm labor, and preeclampsias. And that is why there is the need for intensive treatment. While the diabetes which develops after 20 weeks, predominantly between the 24 to 28 weeks, is labeled as gestational diabetes mellitus, and the criteria for diagnosis or the cutoff for diagnosis of gestational diabetes are fasting more than 92, 1 hour post glucose of 75 grams is 180, and the 2-hour glucose value is 153. And here these are the options: medical nutrition therapy, exercise, self monitoring of blood glucose at home, and then pharmacotherapy. That's all. Thank you. I'm there for the questions if there are. I will try to answer the questions today itself, but if anything, I'll definitely get back to you. And you can directly text me, or you can put in the group also if later on if you have any question.
Yeah. Kunal, thank you for such a detailed class. And at this point, at least I realized that I was at least not rating it correctly. I was controlling sugar, but I was not very sure that abdominal circumference has so much to do. So I just hope that my OG fellows were aware that these are things to be done, and to call medicine people again to see that patient requires intensification. I have very quick two doubts before like we go with students discussion if they have any question. One is like I agree with completely that RCT has already shown now that metformin is not like metformin is almost equal to insulin in respect to complication and all. But suppose like a 20-week or 28-week or somewhere you are getting this reference. So like that mechanism wise pharmacologically, will you think that metformin acts slowly compared to insulin? So insulin is the best, like as such, we know like I will start insulin as per my knowledge. But as endocrinologist, do you think that even though RCT has shown If it's around 28 week or something, I will prefer metformin, because we have now only little time left where we are
Yeah,
supposed to control sugar. So it is not something lifetime controlling of sugar. It is in a way initial part which is most important for baby there. So
yeah.
like, what will be your thought in this?
Yeah, actually, Sanket, what is there? Metformin needs only 4 to 5 days for its action to develop properly. So within a
Okay.
week, you are about to get a full, complete action of metformin is possible within a week. So
Okay.
if only thiazolidinedione, that is pioglitazone, which we are using in type 2 diabetes, these are the only drugs which are taking longer duration to develop its
Okay.
action. That is called 1 month or 1.5 months. But metformin, you
Okay.
can expect an action within a week. And again,
Okay.
metformin is to be used in place of insulin only in the GDMs which are relatively mild.
Okay.
If you are having the 1 hour or 2 hour glucose values which are more than 250, which are more than 220 also, then you straight away start with insulin and don't give a trial of metformin. There
Okay.
is no need,
Okay.
because even on metformin they are going to require insulin over the weeks.
Right. Right. Okay. Great. So at least I realized today that there are so many numbers in endocrinology. So that was one of the reason I didn't take. But same way I love criteria. So rheumatology is my part. But
Right.
I think for student it was very high yield lecture who are especially preparing for DM endocrinology. And like what last year PG, not this year, last year PGI paper we have Dr. Anand who got there in the PGI endocrinology. He has shared with us. So there are at least 3 questions from your class. From 1 hour we have got 3 questions, so which is very high yield for
Okay. Okay.
students who
Great.
are appearing for endocrinology. So we will also share this class. You keep revising, keep noting down. And Kunal, if it is fine, we will like to have your PPT also on the group, or
Of
you
course.
can
Of
tell,
course.
you
I'll
can
I'll
share with
share
me.
it to
I'll
you
share with
on
students.
email. So yeah.
Yeah, sure. I can make it to proper and I can share to my students. Yeah, great. Thank you. So now with students, any other doubt? I think it must be, but still, if it's so many numbers and all, it's okay. But any doubt, anything, you can ask, and we can have words with Dr. Kunal for there.
Uh, Hello, sir. Sir, one doubt. The target fasting glucose you gave 92 for the diagnosis, and for therapeutic it is 95. How can be it is more than the diagnostic criteria?
Yeah, so because target 92 is just for diagnosis, while we are, and as I said, it is the postprandial glucose value. Like for when we are managing gestational diabetes, we are more worried of a outcome of the gestational diabetes. So that is why the monitoring tools or monitoring cutoffs were based on the outcomes, and the outcomes are more dependent on the postprandial glucose values. So diagnosis criteria were according to the HEPO study, which I discussed. HEPO study led to formulation of IAD PSD criteria, that is International Association of Diabetes in Pregnancy Study Group. And the cutoff values which were for monitoring, they are from the another study. So
Okay.
there is some difference in the randomized control trials which led to the formulation of these criteria or these cutoffs, and that is why there is this difference. It hardly matters. Fasting is otherwise also fasting glucose value is all not that important in managing GDM patients. It is the postprandial glucose.
Sir, one more, sir. Mixed start can be used uh, in controlling, or only regular or Detimer is
Yeah,
there?
so same is the status. Mixtard is not FDA approved preparation for use in gestational diabetes. Similarly, observational studies have found Mixtard not to be teratogenic or not crossing placenta as well, similar to other insulin preparations. So if you are having a pregnant patient who is well controlled on Mixtard, you can continue it throughout pregnancy. But if you are asked that whether it is FDA approved or not, it is not approved to be used in pregnancy.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay, I think so, Rajat. Medico-legally, we won't use it. I'm actually scared now in practicing in India. So medico-legally, definitely, I won't push it. What is approved, let's use it. Yeah. Any other question? Okay, only just one honest question, that whatever has been described by Dr. Kunal in detail, it was indeed too much detail, and in a way we can say that it was first sensitization to us as a physician, that we are actually not giving at least optimum care to the patient they deserve. So in a way, it is always better to ask expert. And second thing is best to learn, because you won't have endocrinologist everywhere where you are practicing. So it becomes the duty of physician to learn all these topics and manage it accordingly. So like, can someone at least unmute and tell me that were you really practicing this when you are getting consultation of GDM? One or two person even? From my side, no. Whenever I seen consultation, I've seen a lot in during my MD and post MD, but I didn't go to this details that it should be managed so tightly. These are the targets like this, and these are the monitoring. Specifically, telling the OG fellow or the radiologist that abdominal girth is so important. It is going to change my therapy totally. So it is, I think, one of the point I will take from the class, that if next consultation, either I will consult Kunal, or if he's not available, I will see his class one more time. So Rishabh, Manoj, anyone? I am just seeing this name on my screen. So any input on this, or we won't break and continue?
Sir, we did not follow this as such, but
Yeah.
this is a new insight for us to. From now on, we can follow this.
Right. So it is, the numbers are difficult, and like I agree that till you cross the stage of MCQ, you have to remember. But otherwise, most of the time, even criteria, number, and all things, what practitioner do is they just stick it in their OPD. And second point is, when you keep practicing, this becomes automatic reflexes. So it is just for MCQ purpose, you have to remember for a time being. Otherwise, it is very difficult. I completely agree.
Yeah, of course. Numbers are definitely for the MCQ purpose. Most importantly, in practice, like if you are getting 153 and like 155, you cannot say that 155 is more than 153. It's more or less
Right.
same. So
Correct.
that much adjustment you need to do in your practice. But for MCQ purposes, even 153 is more important than 154.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Sir, one doubt, sir.
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
I have observed one thing. Like generally in GDM patients and all, they do 1 hourly PPBS rather than 2 hours. Is there any role there? Like
You are saying that when the patient is diagnosed of GDM and when
and monitoring, like in
both are
hospital.
okay. Both are okay. Whatever value you are doing is okay. But
nothing better than other.
Nothing better than other. If you are using 1 hour value, then you should always use 1 hour value as a target.
Okay.
And if you are using 2 hour, then stick to 2 hour values. Cutoffs are different for both, that are there, 140 and 120.
Sir, as morphogenesis occurs in the early part of pregnancy,
yeah,
how this diabetic control after like 20 weeks say affects the morphogenesis in that, it doesn't affect in that pregnancy, right?
No,
so only the outcomes are affected with that control.
Outcomes are affected. That is why I already told that pure or true gestational diabetes is not associated with increased risk of congenital anomalies. So it is.
So once first pregnancy is over, when planning for the next pregnancy, what are the cutoffs to be kept?
Cutoff for HbA1c is below or less than or equal to 6.5%. That is what recommended by all guidelines. Before pregnancy, if you are a known diabetic, your HbA1c should be less than or equal to 6.5% for the minimum possible risk of congenital anomalies.
Okay, sir. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Yes, I think there was a lot of insight we got that it's not that simple. And for me, the most like intriguing thing was the duration increases, and that increased weight or gestational, like large, like high birth weight is not there because of this vasculopathy kind of thing taking place in placenta. It's amazing fact to know. So I think we will break for 10 minutes and we will be back to our Harrison. Today I won't be pushing much because you have gone through a lot. You have been through a cardiology class, then this amazing class with gestational diabetes or the diabetes in pregnancy, because this, I think this class will be very helpful for the people who are practicing for like who are planning for DM endocrinology. And It is actually amazing that Kunal has completed his DM 2 years prior, but still his class he has mentioned all the points which can be asked in MCQ. So that's why I used to get everything in first shot. That is the reason there. So we will have more class from him, specifically covering endocrine topics which are very high yield for MCQ. So that will be helpful for everyone in practice also, and especially people who are preparing for endocrine. Okay, Kunal, thanks a lot.
Okay.
We will break for
Yeah.
10 minutes.
Thank you, Sanket. Thank you all for attending, and thank you very much. Yeah. Bye bye.